Hello and welcome back to class. In today's demonstration video, we are going to be discussing a comprehensive overview of Prismacolor color pencils. This review is going to talk primarily about crafting with color pencils and demonstrating some valuable techniques and tips to aid you in your color pencil drawings.
The medium and material of color pencil is not only a great tool to learn as a drawer and as an artist, but it's also a great tool to learn and how to engage with color theory. As you can see here, you can get a variety of different saturated color tones. You can not only create really amazing works of art, but also incredibly detailed versions and works of art with color pencil. So today we're going to break our video down into a few parts. The first part is going to dive into Prismacolor colored pencils. What is the material? What are they made out of? And some basic knowledge on that kind of material. Then we're going to move on to sets that Prismacolor provides, as well as demonstrate a variety of different papers, or talk about really two main papers that are going to be really useful for working with Prismacolor pencils. And then the last part of our demo is going to talk about some specific medium engagement, primarily talking about layering techniques and blending techniques that you can utilize to help enhance not only your knowledge on color pencils, but also the way you build up a drawing with colored pencils. So that last part is going to be a little bit lengthier, and we are going to dive into some basic techniques as well as some more advanced techniques. So please feel free to stop this video, rewatch, or work alongside me while we go through this material. Prismacolor colored pencils are made very similar to a traditional graphite wood pencil. As you can see, the outer body of the pencil is made from a wood material with simple paint around it. It's got some basic kind of information on the bottom part, identifying the color name and number associated with that color of pigment. The wooden body is filled with a core of wax and pigment. The primary binding agent in Prismacolor colored pencils is wax. The wax in this pigment is really soft, and it leads to really nice, well incorporated blending that you can get from this particular type of colored pencil. There are a variety of other different brands that are wax-based colored pencils. In my personal opinion, I think Prismacolor is the best bang for your buck. We also have Faber-Castell, which is another high-quality colored pencil with high pigment ratios to the binding agent. That is going to be an oil-based colored pencil. So the big difference between oil-based and wax is primarily just in terms of how the handling and effect turns out. In wax-based, you get really nice smooth blending, and I think is really ideal, especially for students just learning how to work with colored pencils. As I mentioned, Prismacolor colored pencils have some really great blending qualities. You can really engage with sophisticated layering techniques to really teach you about color theory and color combinations. And they also just provide a variety of different colors to really access a whole gambit of the color palette. So this is a great product for us. We're going to be using this quite a bit, and this is going to be our first introduction into color pencils, as well as teach you some really good tricks. So moving on to our next part of this video, we're going to talk about the variety of sets that you could buy. Prismacolor provides a variety of different sized color pencil sets. As you can see, I've got the 150. This is the max amount of color pencils that you can buy in one set. This is actually all of the pigmented colored pencils that you can buy in this particular set, but they really range quite a bit in size. You can buy anywhere from a 12 set to a 32, and then up to a 24, 32, 48, and a couple of other sizes. Anyways, you'll be so surprised though, if you don't have a lot of money, you don't need to worry about buying a 48 and up set. You definitely don't need to worry about buying a 150 set. I have the 150 set because I personally work with colored pencils quite a bit in my own personal artistic practice. But you'll be really amazed with how much color and value you can actually generate with a 12, 24, and 32 set because of the high quality and high pigment ratios in Prismacolor colored pencils. So don't worry if you are low on funds or if you are just starting out with colored pencils. I recommend buying a lower set anyways, just so you get a feel for the material and medium. And then if you like them, you can invest in more as you work up with this kind of color pencil medium. So that's my basic general buying advice. I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next part of our video here and talking about drawing papers. So there's a variety of different drawing paper we can use when working with colored pencils. In general, I'm going to talk about two main types because we could really dive into a rabbit hole here and never end that discussion. But generally, Prismacolor colored pencils, because of that nice, rich, smooth wax that is encasing that pigment, really provides a really well blended and a really nice quality mark. So you can work with a variety of different papers. In general, you want to work with a paper with a little bit of a tooth. Not too much like a heavy or rough textured watercolor paper, but really you want to work with something that's a nice drawing paper or even a Bristol board vellum paper. Both of these papers demonstrate a high quality kind of artistic drawing paper while providing a kind of flat surface with a teensy bit of tooth. So both of these I would highly recommend for any type of Prismacolor colored pencil use. Of course, our Strathmore drawing pads are really great. This is an 80-pound paper, and it's going to pretty much simulate what most drawing papers kind of feel like. Of course, there's going to be some nuance here, just depending upon brands and the actual type of chemistry behind the paper, but most drawing papers will actually work pretty well with Prismacolor colored pencils. Then we move on to our vellum Bristol board. Bristol board provides a great surface for the medium of color pencils. Once again, you can provide a really nice kind of rich layering. It is a harder pound paper, so it is 100 pounds versus our Strathmore drawing paper that I just showed you was about 80. So this just provides a little bit more stability. This is a heavyweight acid-free archival paper, and it's just a really wonderful paper for working with colored pencils. This is going to take us into our next part of the video, and this is going to be actually when we get into the fun stuff and we start drawing and working with the material. Alright, I just pulled in two of those papers that we just discussed. Our off-white or kind of creamier looking paper over here on to the right is going to be our Strathmore drawing paper. This is an 80-pound paper, and as I mentioned, it does have a little bit of tooth to it. It might register a little bit on the camera when I bend it like this so you can see that value gradient. There is a little bit of tooth. I just want to demonstrate that kind of quality difference or maybe a material difference on the paper. The Bristol board is a much thicker material, weighing in about 100 pounds. So we can see that there is a little bit of tooth too, once again, once I blend or bend that paper, and you can see on the camera that there is a little bit of that speckled gradient. That's just to demonstrate kind of the tooth that's on these papers. Our Bristol board is obviously a little bit whiter, a little bit cooler, and like I said, our drawing paper is going to be a little bit warmer. So it just depends on your kind of personal preference. I prefer to kind of draw on our Bristol board vellum when working with colored pencils, but I just want to show you the different quality results that they're getting. So I'm actually going to pick a kind of color for my 150 set. I'm going to go for a little bit darker red so you can see a nice darker value and have it register on both papers pretty well. So let's get into some basic holding techniques. So Prismacolor pencils, like I said, come in that traditional pencil kind of format, so they're going to be pretty familiar to you if you've drawn before, but there is a variety of different ways you can hold them to access the material at different points. So right now I'm holding it in a traditional writing pose. This is of course that 3-point pose with my index finger, my middle finger, and my thumb kind of bracing it towards the bottom portion of the material end of the pencil. This gives us a detailed mark. It's also a writing kind of mark, so we're going to be able to get kind of a really specific kind of mark here. So I'm going to go ahead and demonstrate on our Strathmore and then our Bristol board vellum. So right now, my detail mark, this is just me kind of creating some nice up and down hash marks. I'm creating a solid kind of blended value. This is me going over it twice, and this is just me going back and forth with it once now. Put a dividing line in the center. And then I'm going to do the same thing over on the left side of our Bristol board. I'm providing the same amount of texture, or the same amount of pressure, excuse me, when I'm going back and forth. I just want to demonstrate the kind of material difference. So there's not much material difference right now. I am noticing that my color is registering a little bit darker over on the Bristol board right off the bat. Also too, I can see a little bit on that textured gradient, or that tooth of the paper is also holding the mark a little bit differently. Here it's a little bit more of a graphic mark. There is a little bit less overall speckled tooth. It's a little bit more like dash marks. Here it's more like almost like a fluffier kind of quality to it. So I've demonstrated that kind of 3-point pose, that kind of traditional handwriting pose or detail marks. But I also want to demonstrate too a traditional kind of drawing method. So you might cradle the pencil in your palm. This could also provide more access to your hand, especially to create more wispy marks. If you're going to be doing more detail strategies, this probably isn't the best drawing method for you. But this is really great for gesture drawing or working larger, or if you want to create more simulated drawing marks. So essentially I just put the colored pencil in my hand, I wrap my fingers around it, I put my thumb on the kind of top portion of the drawing utensil, and then I can just start to draw with it. This strategy is really going to be able to provide a really nice kind of side surface, so I'll be able to access more of the material. Generally, it is getting a little bit duller, so I'm going to go ahead and sharpen this. I've got a little dish with a colored pencil sharpener on the side. Usually I like to have 2 different sharpeners for my color pencils. This gets us into a little small crafting tip. Usually when working with colored pencils, the wax can sometimes dull your sharpener blade down. So I've just noticed over the years I like to just have a colored pencil kind of specific sharpener on the side versus my graphite sharpener. So that's just a good kind of tip there. But as you can see, this drawing position, when I'm cradling it in my hand or in my palm like this, provides a lot more material access. It's not as detailed maybe or saturated as me kind of drawing with it in that 3-point or detailed position, because this position is going to provide a lot more pressure with my hand, versus this I'm getting a lighter kind of sensibility. So I'm going to take this over to my drawing paper now and just apply the same type of pressure. As we can see, there is a little bit of a textural difference between these 2 papers. As I mentioned, this has like a longer fiber, is pretty consistent, similar to this where it's consistent, but they have just kind of 2 different effects. This is a longer fiber, it looks like, and it's kind of more directional, going top to bottom or maybe left to right in this particular case. And this tends to be more of a kind of powdered, speckled kind of look. So there is some kind of paper quality differences with just how that pulp is laying in the actual paper. Our last kind of thing too that we're going to look at before we leave is kind of just thinking about maybe also drawing further back on the kind of shaft of the color pencil. So this is also a really nice drawing technique which you can also get more detail with, but also be able to apply really nice, consistent, even layers of color pencil or color. Your toned paper or your off-white paper is also going to provide just a different color sensibility. This is slightly changing the way the colors are being read. That's even registering on the camera. You can notice this does feel a little bit warmer versus this feels a little bit cooler over here. So this can also change the way you're thinking about color theory and the way you're applying your color pencils. So that's why I generally like to work with more of a white paper too when I'm working with colored pencils, just because I like that color to read a little bit more accurately. All right, I'm going to switch back over now to my actual colored pencil side over here. So we saw and we demonstrated some basic kind of ways to hold your color pencil. That's going to just give you different access points to your material. Our 3-point pose, or our drawing or detail pose, or writing pose, excuse me, is really going to deal more with the tip of the color pencil. Your traditional drawing pose where you cradle the pencil in your hand is going to provide you a tremendous amount of access to the long side of your material, and your drawing position further back on the pencil is just going to provide you kind of an in-between these 2 points. So I'm going to be able to access the tip and also a little bit more of the longer edge of the material, just kind of on the side more. So that's going to be really helpful for kind of going back and forth in terms of your drawing, thinking about how you're holding the pencil, and especially too in what areas you're actually drawing with and how you need to apply that material to aid you in that process. Okay. So let's go into talking about color pencil layering and blending techniques. There are a few different blending techniques that we are going to talk about. Our first is going to be a traditional layering technique. Then we're going to go into burnishing, colorless blending, solvent blending, saturated burnishing, and then a toned burnishing. So I'm going to go ahead and draw out some boxes here, and then I'm going to talk about all of these different techniques and demonstrate them for you in this little section. All right, so I went ahead and made some quick little boxes for us and I labeled them out. I also labeled holding our pencil kind of demonstrations over here so you can keep that in mind as we work forward. So we can see that I've got actually a couple different techniques. Like I said, I mentioned those major six. I might also talk about some other things that might be effective too, just for other kind of detail works on the side, but just keep that in mind that these are the six major ones. So the first, we're going to talk about layering. So layering is going to be your first kind of basis for understanding how color pencils work. So essentially, you're going to think about how you're going to hold your pencil. Once again, I'm just going to hold my pencil in a traditional three-point pose or that kind of writing or detail position. And layering is going to be the first key for really understanding how to create successful color pencil drawings. All of your color pencil drawings are going to be layered in some degree. There's a variety of different pressures that you can apply to create different layers or saturations or even values with your color pencil. You can get a variety of different value in saturation just based on how much pressure you apply with one color. So I've just laid in kind of a simple tone here. As you can see, I had some small overlaps of me just going back and forth. But you can create a variety of different layers, as I mentioned, with just one colored pencil. I'm actually going to just work a little bit over top, and I'm just going to add a second layer, just pushing a little bit harder with my color pencil now. You can see this stronger layer, a more saturated layer developing now, just because I was able to add a second layer on top and just create a little bit more pressure. So layering is going to be absolutely key for working with and understanding color pencils. So this is going to be where we start. I'm going to pull in a couple of other colors now too to demonstrate some of this layering technique. I'm still working pretty lightly here with just kind of a light pressure that I'm adding. I'm going to add in a different type of color altogether now. We're going to go in with kind of a pink. And I'm going to just lay in some color. And I'm going to go back and forth maybe with this pink tone maybe a couple of times. Especially on the right side, I'll go in. Create a nice kind of blended space here for us. Now I'm going to go back in with maybe a warmer red, maybe like a fire engine red on the right. And as you can see, as I've been developing this layer, I'm changing the way that color is being read optically. And this is the whole entire point of color pencils. They really operate with the amount of layers that you add with particular colors or hues that you're working with in your color pencil set. And this is me just applying a light amount of pressure, so I'm not really creating too much pressure with my hand. I'm just comfortably drawing here and working that color pencil back and forth. So as we can see, just through that couple of applying of different layers with the color pencil, I was able to create a variety of different tones and value changes just based on those three color pencils. I first started off, and you can see that lighter value here, just right down at the very bottom of this area, where I was just working with our base color, this kind of mauve kind of color. Then I applied a second layer on top, creating a darker value of that mauve. Then I worked with the pink. As you can see, how that pink layer transports and translates a darker kind of richer value when it goes over those two zones. Same here with that kind of fire engine red. So layering is going to be our first kind of step or introduction into color pencils. And know when we work with color pencils, that is going to be the whole MO. We're really going to think about how to go back and forth between not only pressures with our color pencil, but also thinking about how we might need to change colors or change values to drop either the color or change in warmth or coolness to tweak a tone of a color. So that's going to be our first introduction. So always think about starting with layers and how that's going to be really effective for color pencil use. Now we're going to talk about burnishing. So I'm going to actually go ahead and switch up some color palettes here. I'm going to grab a different set of color. Let's talk about, let's maybe bring in some blues and teals into this conversation of burnishing. So burnishing is a very popular kind of technique for creating a high saturation and a very well incorporated color blending method. Burnishing really kind of implies or emphasizes that layering technique, but with just more pressure. So I'm going to go ahead and start with creating a kind of foundation layer or a base layer. I'm going to start off with this teal. So when thinking about layering too, it's not just about how you're working with your pencil. I'm going to pretty much, since I'm working smaller and more detailed with this demo, hence why I'm working in these kind of boxes, I'm going to be holding my pencil in more of a traditional 3-point pose or drawing, or writing pose, versus that drawing pose that I talked about down here. Let me get those color pencils out of the way. So I'm just going to create a nice kind of layered value here. I'm putting moderate pressure on this, but not too heavy. So it's pretty much light. But I'm also thinking about too, like how I'm layering it. You don't just work in one direction, but you can work in multiple directions. So if you think about a crosshatch or a hash mark, you really want to think about how that layer is going to transform the medium itself. Sometimes too, it might be really important to switch up that layering system and go back to angled forms just to create a nice well-blended form or well-blended value or color. So that's also really going to help you when you're talking about layering and specifics of how to create really well-blended and well-incorporated spaces with a color pencil. We really got to change up our mark sensibility, the way we're layering the actual color pencil, and the way our marks have directionality, right? If you guys were in the classroom with me right now, we'd all be saying, yep, that's right, it's totally correct. You know exactly that, yep. All right, now I'm going to go in and start making an actual burnish. So what burnishing means is it means that you're working with the material with a high pressure and you're really layering a pretty good amount of material onto another layer of the color pencil. Burnishing can also range too. It also kind of means something a little bit different in printmaking. But burnishing is a really good word, especially for us in terms of color pencil drawings, because you'll be able to get a really rich saturated mark. And really, you're working the color pencil in with such a degree that you actually lose some of that speckling of the paper. So it's all just material. I'm going to go in and now just layer, just have a nice kind of light layer of this kind of darker teal. And create a lighter layer. This is going to be a nice transitional zone for when I go back and burnish with my darker value, or my middle teal color. I'm going to go back to my middle teal color now, and I'm going to start actually pushing pretty hard with my material. So this is me burnishing once again. So I'm really pushing hard with the material to create a well-blended value and color. You can see the quality difference with the burnishing mark. It really produces a very saturated, holistically toned space. In some areas too, I'm going back over now with that lighter kind of teal color, and you can see that I'm able to generate a really rich, saturated mark and color. Ooh. That's really well quite blended. And once again, burnishing is just pushing a lot of pressure into a material to really develop a mark sensibility. Oops. Develop a nice gradient, essentially. That's what I'm doing here, is creating a nice gradient. I'm going to go ahead and finish this off. And you really want to develop the values when you start to burnish. In some areas I'm kind of working a little bit quicker than I naturally would if I were doing this on my own, but I'm just trying to speed this up a little bit for demo's sake. So this video isn't a million hours long. Nobody wants to watch that long of a video. I don't want to make that long of a video. Alright, as you can see, I'm really well incorporating that blended space now, and I'm going back and forth between these three colors, and really not only shifting the way I'm holding my pencil, but I'm actually also too shifting up the way I'm directing my marks here. So I'm going back and forth between this kind of T space, so drawing horizontally and vertically back and forth. And as you can see, I get a really well blended gradient from top left to bottom right. Or, excuse me, I did that the other way around. Bottom left to top right. So really well blended space. As you can see, burnishing just when I'm applying the material and pushing pretty hard with my colored pencil and working back between those three tones, I can create a really sophisticated and a very accurate color blend just with that particular technique. So burnishing is going to be a highly used kind of resource for you as a drawer working with colored pencils. So I highly recommend this if you do have any kind of blended areas or areas of kind of significant nuance, or if you really want to create a very saturated, color accurate drawing. Burnishing is 9 times out of 10 going to be a strategy that you use in color pencils. Alright, so keep this one definitely on our high to-do list there, especially for any type of rendering where you're, like I said, you need to get really specific with color and you need to get a really saturated mark. Burnishing is going to be a real key for us. Alright, so let's go ahead and look at a colorless blender. So what is that? Colorless blenders are a pretty great tool. These are usually sold separately. You can of course buy them on Amazon or any kind of art and craft store or art supplier will carry this. This is a colorless blender right here. As you can see, it looks a little bit different than maybe one of our traditional color pencils from Prismacolor. As you can see, this has actually got a wood frame that's exposed wood, and it's just got a little bit of a gloss surface on top, versus our Prismacolor pencils are always painted with the kind of chroma that it's associated with in that core. The blender pencil actually has a just clear wax with no pigment in it. So this is a really great kind of blending tool for us as drawers working with the material and medium of color pencil. So I'm going to demonstrate maybe how to do this. I'm going to switch colors once again. I'm going to go with some kind of purples this time around. So let's look at some of our different toned purples here. I'll pull those out. And I'm going to draw in our box over here. The really great thing about working with Prismacolors too that you'll notice is that they are just, the wax in them is so smooth, it really does create a really buttery kind of drawing or feeling when you're working with them. So it does have a really wonderful surface kind of quality. I'm going to actually make some 4 colors here. We're going to go super crazy. Now I'm just kind of layering this in horizontal layers right now. Of course, I always recommend maybe going back and forth and creating some more dynamic marks, aka going left to right, top and bottom, and then even diagonally. So T and X shapes are always pretty good. I'm just kind of creating a nice solid layer for us to work with here so I can show you some of this blending technique. The blending technique is going to be very similar to our burnishing, so I'm going to push pretty hard with our material. Instead of actually using the colored pencils themselves to burnish, creating that kind of nice transitional blended check here, I'm just going to be working with that blender stick. And creating that kind of saturated mark that way. A little bit more, then we'll do a little bit darker down here, just to give us a little bit more pigment to work with. We'll do 5 colors in this one. This will be a nice gradient for us. Okay, good. Alright, so I'm going to take my blender stick, and then now I'm just going to take it and just draw over top. As you can see, it is doing, it has very similar results to our actual burnishing method. In fact, we are burnishing with this colored pencil. It just is a clear wax center, so there's no pigment in this particular color pencil. As I mentioned, these are usually not found in sets. This wasn't even found in my 150 set. I actually had to buy this separately. You can buy them, usually they come in packs of 2 if you buy them off like a set from Amazon or something. but you can also buy them individually. This brings up another great point about colored pencils. Often if you go to a larger kind of craft supplier or a nicer artist store or vendor, you can actually buy individual colored pencils. So if there is a color that you're really, really wanting to buy, but you don't necessarily want to buy a whole large set, you can actually just buy an individual colored pencil. Dick Blick and Jerry's Artorama, two of my recommended vendors that I always recommend for students. You can actually go on there and buy individual Prismacolor colored pencils. So as you can see, I'm varying my direction of line. I'm going back and forth between horizontal and vertical lines, which is really helping me create a really nice consistent blend here. And now I'm going in and actually creating some kind of diagonal lines. Same here, I'm going back and doing horizontal lines. And I'm able to really create a very successful blended image by just using that clear wax. And I was really able to not use a lot of pigment here. I just used these five colors, but you saw how light it was in comparison to this method, where I was really kind of burnishing with the actual color pencil, creating a very saturated mark with the color pencil versus our clear wax blending or colorless color pencil going over and blending this space. So this is just two different techniques that you use. As you can see, this is a little bit less saturated than our full burnished colored pencil box over here, but you do get the same pretty much effect. You're not really losing that much saturation. A little bit, but you know, you can see the nice quality that this can have, especially the easiness and utility this particular pencil can provide in a color pencil set. All right, so now we're going to go on to solvent blending. So solvent blending is essentially where you're going to use a type of solvent. There's a couple of different ones that you can buy, particularly like an odorless mineral spirit, a turpentine, or in my case, I'm actually using alcohol. So this is isopropyl alcohol. It's of course 70%. I'm actually going to pour some in a dish here. Thanks to COVID, I have like many of these just lying around. I'm actually going to pour some in a little dish over here to the side. I'm going to make sure that I don't work with it directly over my paper. That's just, you know, good crafting tips. And this is where we're going to have to talk about craft too. So I've got some actually over here. Hopefully it won't dry out in time. Usually I recommend, if you're going to be working with an alcohol like I do, the reason I recommend alcohol kind of first to students is because most students usually have this lying around their house somewhere in a first aid kit or something like that. But I do recommend working with a solvent blending method with a heavier pound paper. If you do this with a regular drawing paper, you might have more of a likelihood of buckling or rippling happening because the alcohol, even though it does dry quickly or evaporates quickly, is still a wet material and it's going to affect the quality of your paper. If you're working with a lighter pound paper, such as an 80-pound drawing paper, as our Strathmore drawing paper was, it could ripple or buckle the paper. So we really do want to think about crafting here, especially when using a solvent. So odorless mineral spirits, you're going to want to make sure that you are using that in a well-ventilated space. Even though it says it's a odorless mineral spirit, it is still off-gassing to a certain degree, and you don't want to just be breathing that in. Isopropyl alcohol is a little bit safer, it's a lot safer to work with, so I'm actually doing this. I am in a pretty well-ventilated space too, and that's just good health and safety. So I'm going to go ahead and just have my little dish over here to the side, and I'm actually going to be able to create a little check over here. I'm going to switch my colors up once again. I'm going to do some blues this time, a little bit darker blues. The big key with a solvent blending is essentially you're going to be dissolving your wax. So that's the really great thing about a solvent-based blending system is that, or blending technique, is that you dissolve the wax to a greater or lesser degree, and you're working more with the pigment. So this can be a really nice kind of technique to apply in certain areas, especially if you want a softer kind of quality. Of course, you can draw and generate this kind of quality and to a degree with other types of methods, such as the burnishing technique or the blending colorless technique that I just showed you. But this does have just a little bit of a softer quality. You can also do a little bit of drawing with it on your brush, which could also be nice for some desired techniques. I'm going to add just another darker value here to the side, and then a lighter value on the right here. Add a nice dark blue. Look how pretty that looks. And this is the fun thing too when you're working with colored pencils. You get just so attracted to the color. I'm going to just fade that in a little bit with that layering. And then I'm going to work with a little bit lighter colored pencil over on the right side. Now I'm going to get a just kind of traditional brush here. I'm just going to grab from the side. So I'm going to grab a couple actually. Okay, this looks like a good size. So this is just a size 12 bright brush. Any kind of brush will work. I'm just going to dab it and kind of activate it and load it up with our alcohol. And then I'm just going to go ahead and slowly work it in. I'm going to make sure that I'm not putting too much alcohol or too much wetness on the paper. Even though this is our Bristol paper, it's got a heavier weighted paper and it could be able to put up a little bit more kind of resistance than our drawing paper. I just don't want to oversaturate an area. And this in fact gets me into our next point about working with the solvent. You don't want to oversaturate an area because it could kind of distort a little bit your paper. Two, it could just, like I said, warp it a little bit. But it is a really nice technique. And you can do quite a bit with it. You just want to make sure that you don't overlap it. Like I said, this creates a really kind of fuzzy line, really soft. It does have this kind of watercolor sensibility to it as well. So you'll still be able to see some of the grain or that kind of whiteness or quality of the paper show through. But it just allows you to have kind of a soft blended area. This is really nice for like any kind of waterscape that you might do. Any kind of still lives where you really want to have some, like you want to generate some glass, kind of abstraction happening in glass, with shadows in glass. This could also be really lovely. As you can see, we get a really kind of lovely quality in that blending. Very organic, very kind of nice fluid transitions here. Their pages popping up just a teensy bit with that activation of the alcohol, but it's really not that bad. Nothing that won't be, nothing that'll destroy a Bristol board at least, okay? And I'm saturating this area a decent amount, okay? Like I said, you don't want to like totally soak your brush, but just lightly wet it, and you'll be able to tell a difference too as soon as you start working with it. And once again, I'm just going back and forth, creating a nice kind of swishy motion, I guess you can say, with my color pencils. Alright, and so that's going to give us a really nice example of a blended technique with our solvent. Of course, solvents, you always want to make sure if it is an odorless mineral spirit, like I said, you do want to have it in a well-ventilated space. You don't want to be breathing it in directly. And then two, just another pointing tip. I have to let my solvent dry for a little bit before I go back over and work on it. So this is also another good crafting tip and note to be aware. After you apply your solvent and the paper is still damp like it is right now, you cannot go back over it with another layer of colored pencil. You have to wait to let this dry. If you start to go into it now, you could actually damage and tear up your paper. So I recommend letting it dry for about anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes. Start to feel it. If it feels cool to the touch, that still means it's wet. And then just give it, if it's still cool to the touch, I'd give it maybe another 10 minutes to dry, okay? So that's a good crafting tip. Just keep that in mind. Make sure your solvent is completely dry before you go back over it with a layer. So that's also the nice thing too about the solvent technique, is that you can do this multiple times. Just as long as you're being aware of that dry time in between. You can build up a variety of different mixed layers and go back and forth between solvent and color pencil layers as many times as you want. Once again, you just got to be aware of that dry time and not draw on it while it's still wet or damp. All right, I'm going to go ahead and just put my solvent and brush to the side. Really, most brushes, most watercolor brushes will be fine. Even some kind of cheap crafting brush will actually work totally fine for this technique too. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and talk about our saturated burnishing. This is going to be pretty similar to our burnishing technique up here where we work with a colored pencil. But essentially it talks about a base color. This is going to be really important for any type of like master type works that I have my 2D class do, identifying a base kind of color to work with. And I also recommend identifying a base color when you start to go work with colored pencils for just basic kind of drawing techniques, learning how to see and identify color and what is the base kind of color of that, so you can go ahead and start drawing it. So I'm going to go ahead and start doing that right now. So let's say I'm going to, let's get some greens in here. I don't think we've done a full green yet. We're going to do some green over here. We'll get some line and maybe some forest green for us. Now, as you can see, most of the methods that I am using, they really do involve, once again, that concept of layering. So this is the whole key with colored pencils. You really want to make sure you're emphasizing that layering, and you're really thinking about the colors that you're selecting for your drawings. Especially to be specific with objects or the subject matter of your drawings. You really want to make sure that you're getting accurate reads on those kind of base colors for this objects or subject matters. So I'm going to be making a base color here, and I'm going to try to find a color in between these two. This is a good idea about saturated color blending, is finding a base color between your colors that you're blending. So let's say I need a darker green. Let's make this middle green our base color. So I'll extend this out into this space. There we go. Let's do that. And that way we can really push the darker value over here. That'll be a little bit better for our camera registration. And I'll go ahead and just draw this space up, develop it. Once again, adding that layer of darker green on top. Once again, I'm going to go back over it, both doing vertical and horizontal lines, getting a really nice kind of well-developed space. Got a decent blended area here. So once again, my color down at the bottom left is a light green, and my color at the top right is this dark green. So base color or in between color of those are going to be this really dark or this middle tone green. So I'm actually going to start burnishing once again, so applying a tremendous amount of pressure with my colored pencil. Over the entire space of this drawing. So this is the saturated method of burnishing. So you take a base color of that subject matter or area that you're coloring in, and you fill it in with that base color. So burnishing, in case you guys can't pick this up already, is going to be a big tool and a big strategy for us with colored pencils. Now, of course, we can go back in if we want to create a darker and lighter pocket, similar to our regular burnishing technique. But as you can see, this just provides a little bit more saturated quality of color. We do lose some value gradient, obviously, with that kind of saturated color blending technique. Because once again, we're finding that middle tone color between these two lighter and darker colors. But as you can see, it registers as a very, very saturated green, and that's because it's got multiple layers of green under it, so it picks up a very, very saturated green. Even right now in my studio, The lighting's pretty decent, but this is really popping off the page compared to the other four that I have up top. So it really is popping quite loud, much more vibrant and bright than it's actually registering on camera. So the saturated burnishing is really going to be nice for any kind of foreground work or bright colors that really just need to pop. So find that base color in between and then go into it. So let's talk about tonal burnishing. So tonal burnishing is actually where you create a color burnishing situation, but you actually use gray, middle tone gray, to burnish. So I'm going to go ahead and pull out, like I said, another color area. Let's pull out some, let's go with some oranges maybe. That's going to be a nice tone that we haven't worked with yet. Okay, we'll pull out some kind of nice orangey, peachy colors here. And then we're going to get maybe a gray. And once again, we want to find a nice middle tone gray. So this is going to be the color that I'm actually burnishing with. So as you can see, we've got our 3 oranges and our gray over to the side. So I'm going to go ahead and start filling in my little check over here with some color. You don't want to like hurt your hands either when you're color penciling or you're filling in color. So just be aware too, like if you need to switch your hands up or give your hands a break, or even just change the way you're holding your color pencil, that's totally fine too. You don't want to like be drawing so hard that you're getting indentions from the color pencil in your hand, right? So give yourself a break, and if you need to use other colored pencil blending methods to give yourself a break, go ahead and do that. Burnishing in particular, if you do it for long enough, your hand's going to start to cramp up. So make sure that you're taking care of yourself, and if you need to take a break, totally take a break. That is a real thing, and it does happen, and be aware of that. I don't want you getting carpal tunnel after years of drawing with colored pencils and burnishing. There's also too, like you can go back and forth between how you're using or layering the color pencils and applying pressure. So sometimes if you want to create a lighter kind of value, sometimes you don't need to burnish. You can just let some of that white of the paper pop through or peek through. It just all depends on quality and saturation, how you want that color pencil to read, how you want that drawing to read. 9 times out of 10, I think burnishing does look a little bit better. But, you know, you can go back and forth quite a bit. And just because you're not doing it, you're not burnishing the whole entire time, doesn't mean that it could look bad, right? So just figure out what works best for you. If you need to take a break from burnishing, I totally get it. Step back. Go grab a Polar or something and chill out. Alright, so I've got a nice, pretty well burnished area. As you can see, or I should say blended area. I didn't burnish on this. This is just actually me providing a medium weight pressure here, so this is pretty comfortable to draw with. I could do this actually probably for hours. So this isn't burnished. I can still see some paper pulp or paper texture actually peeking through this color. But as you can see, I'm able to get a high saturated color just from that kind of like drawing that I was doing. Just with providing those 3 different colors on top of each other. Alright, I'm going to go back over and do some tonal burnishing now. So this is actually going to be just me adding some gray. This is really, really great for any type of situation where you're starting to blend or think about color mixing. And you're really starting to think about how color might start to dissipate or become less saturated as it goes back in space. So this will be really, really nice for any type of perspective drawing if you have details in the back. If you need to get it to be a certain color, but let's say you don't have that value of that color, you can actually just put a gray on top of it and it will totally tone that space out. As you can see, I'm burnishing this area pretty well. And it's really desaturating the color, giving us this really beautiful chromatic gray. And chromatic grays are our favorite, right? Those colorized grays really do a lot of work in our drawings. So really make sure you're using colored grays. There's a variety of different ways to make gray if you don't have it, or get us a chromatic gray if you don't have it in your color set. So you don't necessarily have to go buy a gray, but you can do some quality chromatic kind of gray techniques to generate some of those more neutralized colors. So as you can see, that really took the saturation down on that, but I was able to create a really well blended and very well burnished image. And I wasn't actually putting too much pressure on this. And I think that's too another good technique when talking about burnishing. You don't have to put a tremendous amount of pressure on, but just go over it a couple of times with your color pencil to build up those layers, and that'll actually create a nice burnished mark. As you can see, it really dropped our saturation down. Like I said, this tonal burnishing is going to be really ideal, especially for spaces that appear far away, or if you do need to neutralize or desaturate a color. That's going to be a really big one for us. So these are our kind of big techniques over here. I also want to demonstrate too a couple of other areas where we add white and then also adding color complements to each other. So I'm going to go ahead and draw some extra boxes for us on the side just to demonstrate a couple of other techniques or some other kind of basic color theory things to think about when layering color pencils next to each other. All right, so drawn out over on the side, I just added a couple more boxes for us so we can just keep ourselves a little bit more organized. I'm drawing them very crookedly, so sorry about that. All right, so these three other boxes, they're going to demonstrate real quickly some other types of assets that you can start utilizing when making decisions at your drawing boards. So I'm going to go ahead and create another kind of similar gradient here with some colored pencils. I'm going to create maybe another type of red gradient, let's say. We have limited red gradients over here. And I'm going to just add white to this. So this is going to be a really nice contrast compared to our tonal burnishing, where we just did our orange check here down on the bottom. This is just going to show you some kind of color differences for when you add white to an image. So you can also burnish with white, and this is another kind of technique that can be just a version of tonal burnishing. So I think that this could be a really nice, useful strategy. Now, anything that you add to a layer of color pencil is obviously going to change the way that color pencil is read, or that hue is read. So by adding white, we're going to desaturate it some, similar to our tonal gray down here. But you can also just lighten the value or darken the value depending upon what you add. So I'm going to just show you what this will look like just here in a second once I get this all filled in. Okay, there we go. Got some nice layers. As you can see, I got actually a pretty decent value gradient just with those that one layer of red and that one layer of mauve. So I'm going to go ahead and find my white, wherever it may be. There we go. I'm going to go ahead and sharpen it actually. So just do that on the frame. See the whole process. There we go. I also really like this color pencil sharpener because it gives me so much material to work with. Look at that, that's great. All right, so I'm actually going to just start layering in my white now. Our white is actually a really nice burnishing tool, and I always like to show students this because it's not perfect like our colorless blender, because that colorless blender, of course, doesn't have any pigment in it, so it works a little bit better than this. This kind of gives us a little bit of a frosty kind of color just because of that titanium white that they're using as a pigment. But as you can see, you're actually able to get a really nice burnish with just adding white. I want to, like, whenever I show this, I'm always a little bit hesitant because I feel like students are like, oh, I'm just going to burnish everything with white. You don't always want to do this. Specifically, I think this is one of the reasons I wanted to show you the red. Specifically, too, you'll get into some hues and you'll notice they're more sensitive to white than others. So up here, this is a really saturated kind of rich red. As you can see, it's a kind of darker mauve color almost. And I'm going to just add another layer just to kind of show you that difference. It's a really dark mauve, but once I start to mix it with the white, it really turns this kind of purpley pink. So this is another area too that you could think about using, but just use with a little bit of restraint. So maybe don't always do this with all of your drawings. But this could be a really useful technique, especially for burnishing and adding lighter values, or just dropping it down and kind of value a little bit. So this could be a really helpful technique. Just add some white and burnish with your white. So as you can see, it does a really great job blending. I've got a really well blended space now. Once again, I'm just kind of going over with both vertical and horizontal lines, and actually some diagonal lines too, just to give me a well saturated and well incorporated mark. Okay, perfect. So a really nice kind of blended space here with just adding white. Okay, so let's add some value to color. So often you will run into certain situations or circumstances where you're going to be working with a color and you need to drop the value of it. So I'm going to just take another color here from my arsenal. Let's find a good color to drop the value on and raise the value up. Let's find, I've got so many colors in front of me, this is hard. Let's work with this red again. Red's going to be our theme. Okay. All right. I'm going to actually just fill in this whole entire box with a nice layer of this red hue. I'm going to try to do a decent job of just creating a nice clean layer. So I'm going back over and doing both horizontal and vertical lines to give me a nice even distribution of material across the page. So that's going to be also really important. So I know I've said that a couple of times now, but it's always nice to repeat yourself in case you forget. As you can see, once I do that, I get a really nice, well blended kind of space. So that really helps. Okay, so I've got a nice kind of color down in this check. And I'm going to go ahead and maybe start changing the value. So what we can do here, and I think this is really important, you can change the value a couple of different ways. So first off, I'm going to change the value actually with black. I notice mine's a little bit warmed down, so I'm going to go ahead and actually sharpen it a little bit. So you can add a traditional black color and just change the value. Going to have a pretty big effect in dropping the value of our red. As you can see, I can really push it to and start even burnishing a little bit with our black. Give us a really dark value here, like a black red almost. Okay. As you can see, our black is really going to push it towards that black category. You can go back over it again with a red and start to burnish in with the red to give you a kind of darker red color. So I'm going to go back and do that now on this area. And I'm just going to maybe create a little check over here of this red so we can see it a little bit better, just to know where we started off. So I'm just going to apply the same amount of pressure, roughly, that I applied to this kind of center of the check. All right, just so we kind of have a nice base color to work off on both sides, so we can see that difference. All right, we can also think about too adding gray. We saw how the gray really affected this color down here, but we can also really tone a color nicely with gray to change the value. This is a nice way to do this as well. A good way to do it. Adding gray to things is always going to neutralize a color. So this will really push it into that gray category. But we can also see, if we go back over it with the red too, we can bring back some of that saturation. So once again, we've got a little bit of a kind of going back and forth situation with that colored pencil. So the black really pushed it into a really dark category. The gray gave us a nice kind of neutral in between, which makes sense because it's gray. And once again, I went back over those spaces with red just to pull back some of that red saturated color. But here's where we can get into some really fun color theory. And let's think Impressionists here. We don't always have to darken a value with black or gray, but we can actually darken it with darker colored values or darker colors in general. So I'm actually adding a brown to this. This is going to shift the color obviously a little bit because it is brown, so it's a color. And depending upon the value or of the color that you're darkening it with, it can kind of shift a little bit in range. But I'm going to go grab that squeaky toy real quick. Hold on. Puppy just got a brand new squeaky toy and she's really into it. So, okay, we can go back and add a darker brown to this, and just depending upon your brown, whether it's a cooler brown or warmer brown, it can change the color too. But as you can see, we've got a really great now color. Once I go back over, there she goes. Hold on one second. All right, round two, here we go. But as you can see, once I go back over it with that red color pencil, it really does have a wonderful saturated darker value quality. So sometimes the best solution to darkening a color, especially if you are working from a more limited set of colors like a 24 or 36 pack, you really want to think about, or 32 or however big it is, you really want to think about maybe using colors of just darker value, right? That can be a really easy solution for creating not only a great dark valued color, but also a really sophisticated color. So use this technique, and also use your browns. Browns are an incredible resource in your color pencil set to not only create sophisticated colors, meaning they're just complicated colors because browns take so much pigment to actually make them, but they can also shift a value quite a bit. Okay, as you can see, I'm able to get a really true sense of a warm red here without losing saturation or shifting too much into the gray or black category by simply just adding brown in to make that color darker. So it's a really sophisticated technique, it's a really easy technique, and everybody has a brown color pencil. So this shit works. Okay? Alright, other kind of colors that we can use too. We can also use violets or indigos, right? Our purples can make for really great cool reds. And now traditionally I was just working with a really warm red, so this can really cool this situation down quite a bit. But also create a really lovely value. I'm going to go back over and burnish a little bit. I need to sharpen this color pencil. So I've been using it so much. This is also going to be a good tip too when working with color pencils. You're going to notice how much material you're going to go through, especially if you're burnishing a lot. And look at this great intense red color that I was able to get. And you can see it brings down the value quite a bit. Similar to our brown, it just has a little bit darker or cooler quality to it. So this is a really great technique for us, a really amazing technique for us, just to think about using our darker valued colors to naturally darken the value of a pigment that we're working with, all right? Our last one that we're going to show you, and this is a pretty great one, is we're going to pull in now a color complement for this. So this is also another way to darken a value. So the complement to red is green, right? So this is actually going to do something similar to our gray. It's going to neutralize this color. I'm going to show you a variety of this, and as it works out, a variety of different neutralizing tones in our bottom check here. But I just want to show you in this red too, since we're darkening colors, we're thinking about darkening colors. And look how much darker this red now is. So in case you're having a hard time seeing these kind of differentials, I'm going to actually just block this out, a little bit of line on my ruler. Great. So they are really similar, which is really great. You're still able to see how dark they can get, but they just provide us 3 different types of darker value of that red. I'm going to pull this a little bit closer up to the camera so you can see it a little bit more. Now, of course, it is a little bit streaky, and I might go back and rework that, just creating a little bit more left to right lines or horizontal lines. But as you can see, those kind of different qualities of creating dark value, and originally this was our base color, right? So we can see where we went from and how dark we were able to get it with our brown, purple, and our green, okay? So once again, we were really thinking about using darker pigments here, right? Naturally colored darker pigments like our brown and our indigos or violets. And then over here, we used a color complement of green. So all three of these are really generating a variety of different intense and really beautiful red colors and deep, rich value. So this is some really advanced kind of stuff in terms of color theory. And I want you to think about using your browns, using your darker colors like indigo and violet, navy blue to really darken your values on some of your lighter pigments or colors in your color pencil set. Also think about those color complements. Speaking of color complements, let's go ahead and add our color complements down here. So we're going to go ahead and talk about this. So we just saw a little bit of the power of color complements and what they can do for one another when they are used together. Color complements are essentially colors that are complementary to one another on the color wheel. We're going to talk about this, or we do engage with this quite a bit as artists when we talk about color theory. And so this takes us into another layer of why color pencils can be so useful in terms of teaching us a lot about color theory, as they'll provide us these really great instructional kind of qualities of working with colors from the ground up. And where's our yellow? I've got so many colored pencils over here. It's like almost too much, right? This is the downside of working with a really large set. You get lost in the color. So I'm going to just neutralize these warmer colors by adding color complements. So I'm going to do smaller checks down here of their complementary colors underneath to clarify. So our color complement to red is of course green. I'm going to just do a small little check underneath. Color complement to orange is blue. Let me find a good blue. Sure, that looks good. And our color complement to purple, or to yellow, is purple. Just gave that one away. I always think of the Lakers, right? And this gets us into thinking about aggressive color schemes and passive color schemes. Passive color schemes are going to be more on the cooler side, so they're always going to be green, blue, and purple for passive. For aggressive color schemes, they're always going to be on the warmer side, so red, orange, and yellow. So let's go ahead and pull these colors up and see what they do in terms of changing our colors and how they neutralize each other because they're color complements. So see how well they neutralize each other? They really create this really great brown in between. So this is also a way to create a chromatic type of brown, or a pigmented type of brown. So we're really looking at how to create a color blending between color complements. And this is also a really great area, especially too, you're going to find this out in nature. This actually happens quite a bit. There's going to be two color complements maybe in one image, and they're going to be able to create a really strong neutralized color. As you can see, they all look a little different hue-wise or chromatic-wise. And I'm going to go back over and burnish these a little bit more so we can get a more deep and saturated kind of color. But once I start to add them together, you can really start to see how these are working out. I'm going to go back in now and just burnish this a little bit, creating that yellow on top, that orange on top, and now that red on top. I'll keep that again. Let's go back over it with a little bit of green. Now we can really see those differences and browns being generated from those color complements. And look at that. We have a really great brown neutralized kind of gray color that's created from that. Just going to zoom that up a little bit so you can see those differences, okay? All right, so this is going to conclude our kind of color pencil techniques and demos. So I hope you learned a lot here. Remember, think about how you're going to hold your color pencil and how you're going to apply pressures with your color pencil to not only create saturation, but to also create value changes and textural changes with your color pencil. Also think about adding these techniques that I showed you, going back and forth between layering and burnishing, or using different types of other materials such as solvents to create really sophisticated blending techniques and enhance your color working techniques with color pencil. All 6 of these are really fabulous techniques. We also kind of added a 7th one kind of naturally or organically over here with adding that white. So think about how you can use these in tandem with each other when they might be more useful. We also engaged a little bit with color theory. So we first started off with thinking about value with color, how we can not only add black, gray, browns, violets, and blues, but also the color complements to create really sophisticated and gray to brown colors, just using color complements. So this is going to conclude our video. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope this taught you a lot about color pencils. Happy drawing and enjoy.